Welcome everyone to our first webinar from the counseling office. And thank you to Ivy Harrison for getting us organized here. I'm bringing you tonight our FCD rep, Stephanie, who has been working with our upper school students since Monday. She'll be here Monday through Wednesday. And as usual, she spends every day with the 10th grade in small groups, and she meets with the seniors once to talk to them about the transition to college. And overall, Freedom from Chemical Dependency is a nonprofit organization that provides alcohol, tobacco, and other drug education to schools and colleges worldwide. And what we like about this program is it meets the kids where they are. It doesn't tell them what they should or shouldn't do, but it informs them and helps them make informed decision, which is a piece of the puzzle of our helping your student know how to think, not what to think. So the way this webinar will work is that Stephanie will present the information to you in a PowerPoint. If you look at the top left of your screen, there's a button that says Q&A. You're welcome to click that anytime and type in a question. And at the end of the presentation, Stephanie will look at those questions and answer them. And if there are further questions after that, you're welcome to email them and she will get back to you with the information. And also, just so you know, you are muted. So if there are noises at your house, as there often are at mine, don't worry about those coming across on the broadcast. We will also be recording this program, so if for some reason you haven't been able to attend the whole thing or you've come in late, I'll send out the link tomorrow to the program so that you're able to see it in entirety. So again, if you look at your screen to the top left, there's a Q&A. You can type questions into that Stephanie will answer at the end of the presentation. And I am going to hand over to Stephanie so that she can begin her presentation. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Stephanie Voiles and I am with FCD Prevention Works, and I'm very excited to be working here at Augusta Prep this week. This is my second year working at this school, and last year as well as this year I worked with the 10th graders. They got 3 days of intensive student education with me in the classroom, and we're going to discuss a little bit tonight about what that intensive student education looks like, and also tips on how do you handle substance use within the community, as well as how do you talk to other parents. FCD is a private nonprofit organization. We're actually in our 40th year this year. We've worked in almost 70 countries. And really our purpose as an organization is to provide schools with prevention programming in the classroom, as well as intervening on unhealthy behaviors. The goal, when we talk about intervening on unhealthy behaviors, really what we're looking at is having conversations around if a student comes to us and says, hey, I've been using a substance, or I'm worried about one of my friends, or there's something going on, we absolutely will pass that over to the counseling department. I am not a trained counselor. I am, however, a certified prevention specialist. And so my goal is to really facilitate an in-classroom discussion, work with parents within a community, work with other faculty members within a community, so that we can nurture protective factors within that community, and ultimately help keep healthy kids healthy. And if you take a look at this wheel, what we have here is really the FCD prevention planning wheel. And this is a part of what we call the comprehensive prevention plan. And comprehensive prevention planning is everything that we work with within a community. So if you look at the top of the wheel, what you'll see here is substance abuse prevention education. We also, of course, have different policies within the school community, because that affects the comprehensive prevention plan. If policies within a school community don't complement or don't support other avenues of prevention, the comprehensive prevention plan effectively won't work as well. And so our goal is to get as many of the spokes of this wheel in line with one another. Again, as we look at this wheel, you'll notice that there's a student voice. What do students have to say? We have programs in place which students can work with other students. We also have early intervention teams in place in certain schools that ultimately there are groups of teachers where kids can that are assigned where students can approach those teachers for support and help. Also, of course, as we're talking about tonight, the parent voice, which is really, I think one of the most important spokes on the wheel. As we look at the intensive student education, we're going to get back a little bit to the parent voice in just a minute, but as we look at the intensive student education, you'll notice that within the seminars, we had 3 classes this week with the 10th graders. And what you'll notice within the seminars is that we basically work from the macro down to the micro. So really on the first day, what we focused on was the effect of music, the effect of media, the effect of the world around us. And then we move in, and even though we only had 3 sessions with the kids this week, we were able to navigate the seminars as questions come up, as discussions around use and non-use and healthy decision making come up. We're able to navigate each of these seminars, so they may not fit perfectly as in terms of session 1, 2, 3, 4, but we are able to navigate each seminar as they fit for that school and for that community. Oftentimes we hear students say why they use substances, and what you'll see here, this is the general list. This is the having fun, stress, everybody's doing it, and also not forgetting, at the end of the day, sometimes it might just feel good. Oftentimes that is also why kids continue to use. So not just why they start to use substances, but also why they continue. And with prevention is really, for my personal philosophy anyway, prevention and treatment are on the same scale, right? So an earlier intervention is an intervention that happens before a problem gets worse, right? Or maybe we do prevention on the scope of intervening and we're just keeping healthy kids healthy, and we don't even run into a problem down the line. But at the end of the day, we're preventing future problems from happening. And so if we can have the right, if we go thinking back to that wheel, if we have the right spokes of that wheel, if we have faculty members that are supportive of non-use, having clear language around non-use and healthy choices, if a counseling department has correct language, is supportive of students, which of course I've been at this school, again, this is my 2nd year, and Miss Hudson's door is always open for students. And that's actually a really great thing that we notice in communities, because an open door for a student means that they have one more trusted adult that they can go and they can speak to. In the classroom, we talk quite a bit about, we have meaningful discussions around who is a trusted adult, who do you think you could go talk to? So if you don't think that you could go talk to your own parent, maybe because it's just an uncomfortable conversation, like so many of us have probably had, who else can you go talk to? Can you go talk to another faculty member? Is there somebody that you particularly trust within that community? And allowing them to have a voice, allowing them to speak up and say that something's going on with them and they feel safe enough. And that's the beauty of prevention, is that when we help students feel safe and comfortable, they're able to have more of what they want in their lives, and the use of substances doesn't have to interfere. Addiction is characterized by the repetitive use of a substance despite negative consequences. This could, of course, also be a behavior. We know that there are some behaviors that have been identified as addictive. But at the end of the day, with addiction, we're trying to prevent this disease from happening. There are a whole host of other negative consequences that can happen as a result of high-risk substance use. But at the end of the day, addiction is the long-term disease that we're trying to prevent from happening. Some of the risk factors that we talk about with addiction that we have meaningful discussions around, especially in the classroom. What we did in the class today was I broke the class up. Classes are actually pretty small, so it's not too difficult to work with. And I broke them up into 4 groups, and I gave them each a risk factor. And I asked them, how does this play into the progression of addiction? And how does this affect whether or not somebody gets addicted or doesn't get addicted? And I used family history, I used tolerance, we used negative consequences, and we also used age of first use for that. And really what they're doing in that method of teaching, they're able to learn from one another. They're able to teach back so that I don't have to stand and teach the whole time. They're able to better process that information, implement some critical thinking skills there, and ultimately they're part of their own prevention. It's not just somebody coming in and saying, okay, so this is this information, memorize it, and don't do drugs, kids, because that's not our approach. What we know in prevention long term is that scare tactics, what we've learned is that scare tactics aren't evidence based. What we've also learned is that kids need to have a voice, and every FCD prevention specialist is also in what you would call long term healthy recovery from addiction. And myself, I actually this Sunday I'll be celebrating 11 years of long-term healthy sobriety. And so really what that means for me in my life is that I make healthy choices, and I have a great opportunity to go into classrooms using appropriate language, appropriate presentation styles, and I have the opportunity to share bits and pieces of my life and my story with students, all a part of the curriculum. And so we're not using information, we're not telling the nitty gritty stories, but we are bookending our conversation with some of the negative consequences. And so as we look forward here, we also talk a bit about brain development. And, I think a big piece of our curriculum that I think works so well is that within our curriculum, it's set up so that we can ask open-ended questions. And as we teach this curriculum, there has to be some component of like fact telling. And when we talk about how the brain works, and we're talking about how the developing brain is more susceptible to the development of addiction, we're teaching that in relatively simple language and relatively simple terms. But at the end of the day, we're trying to prevent a disease. And this disease of addiction hijacks the part of the brain that's responsible for reward. The brain is going through the teenage years, the brain is going through a process of what we call synaptic pruning. There is a decrease in the gray matter and an increase in the white matter. As the brain is going through this process of myelination, it's maturing, and it is changing, and it is developing. And I'm sure that there's this thing that happens with teenagers, and it's called they're doing the best that they can with what they got. Their brains aren't fully developed. I'm sure that some of you have your kids, maybe some of them have done something they weren't supposed to do. And when you followed up with them and said, why did you do that? How many of you have ever had your child say, I don't know? Right? That's something that it's because their brain isn't fully developed. The decision-making part of their brain isn't fully developed. You pair that with a chemical like alcohol or marijuana that impairs decision-making skills, and what you have is a recipe for disaster. The teenage brain, what their brain is capable of experiencing in terms of reward and feeling good, having the best day of their life and then turning around and having the worst day of their life, right? As dramatic as it might seem and feel, their brains are wired differently than the adult brain. And so we need to meet students where they're at. The conversations that we have are really primed around the psychosocial aspect of why do people make decisions. And with teenagers, most parents that I ask, if I ask parents and I say, how do you think that your teenager makes their decisions? Is it based on all of the understanding and all of the very factual basis of this is how it affects the brain, which is very important information. But typically what we find is that it's either that or it's the social aspect, right? So it's I make my decisions based on how I feel. I'm making my decisions based on what I think my friends want me to do. I'm making my decisions based on what effect or what this substance is going to do for me. That's a psychosocial aspect. And most parents say, absolutely, my kid makes their decision based on how they think what it's going to do for them or how they think it's going to make them feel. Another key aspect of our curriculum is what we call the social norms approach. And typically what happens with social norms, this is something that research has been, we've been looking at research in the prevention field since the early 90s on social norms. And what I love about social norms is that it teaches what's really happening in terms of the numbers of use amongst peers. Teenagers tend to grossly overestimate the numbers of use, or alcohol use, marijuana use. They tend to grossly overestimate the use of their peers, and if they believe that their peers are using more than what's reality, then they're more likely to use a substance. Because at the end of the day, when we look at, in a sense, human nature, right? We have trends, like we have clothing trends, or we have food trends, or we have trends in our environment, like furniture trends, and all of those things. It's perfectly okay and acceptable to buy that really great outfit, or it's perfectly fine and acceptable to wear a hoodie, or wear a pair of Converse sneakers, because right now that's fashionable, and it makes you feel good, and it's not hurting anyone, and it's not hurting anything. When it comes to trends around what people do in regards to substance use, what we actually know is that the numbers typically are lower than what most people think. Even I think as adults, we put it on students saying, oh, well, everyone's going to drink, or we think that if alcohol is more widely available, then we can teach our teenagers how to drink. But at the end of the day, that's an outdated thought. And so really what we do with the social norms approach is we talk about substance use as a whole, in the sense of bringing some of those perceptions down. So what we have done in the classroom, for example, is we've used some statistics based on Southeast regional data from the FCD Student Attitudes and Behavior Survey. We've also looked at some research data from the National Institute of Health that looks at college research. And one of the questions that I posed the sophomores this week was, what percentage of college kids do you think drink alcohol? And they said 70, 80%. That was about the number I got in the classroom. And as of 2004, 80% would have been correct. But as of 2014, that number has actually decreased by 20%. That's really exciting and great news for your 10th graders. And the reason for that is, why that's so great, is because not only are we doing a better job as a society on prevention, we are getting our message out there further. Prevention is working. The other key is that what that means for your own child is that the social norms are actually lower than what is perceived. And so by the time your child reaches college age, and that was 2014 data, so by the time you're sophomore, we're going to be already 5 years in to the next level of research wave that's coming out. But the bottom line is that those numbers are dropping. And that's great news, because that means that there are more opportunities for non-use within a college community. And typically what happens on the college level trickles down into the high school level. The better that we get at prevention on the collegiate level, the better we get at prevention on a high school level. And when we look at certain substance use patterns, I just really wanted to share with you some numbers from Monitoring the Future. And what you see here, what we know is alcohol and cigarette use. Cigarette use is pretty much at, you don't really see kids walking around smoking cigarettes as much as we used to. There are certainly some. I don't know that we'll fully eradicate it, but there are certainly some kids that are walking around still smoking cigarettes. But we've really made it a public health crisis in this country. And so alcohol and cigarette use are actually at their lowest points, and that is great news. And we know that this survey data is accurate because of the way that the questions are asked. Within this survey data, this has been, Monitoring the Future is out of Michigan. They're a national survey, and they survey students across the United States, grades 8, 10, and 12, and they do an annual survey. They publish it. You can find that online. I'll give you the resources at the end of this webinar. But what we notice, one thing that we notice anecdotally, is when we hear about rises in heroin use, just amongst people in general, you hear a lot about it in the news, or you hear a lot about Molly or ecstasy in the news, we actually see those numbers increasing on the Monitoring Future survey as well. And so we also know that one of the bigger risks for today's youth, for middle schoolers as well as high schoolers right now, is e-cigarette use. And with e-cigarettes, I think the biggest challenge with them is that they can hide them, that kids can hide an e-cigarette pretty easily because it looks like a pen. And inside of what looks like that pen, inside of that electronic cigarette, is a battery, a heating element, and a cartridge. Some of those cartridges have liquid nicotine in them. Some of them don't. The majority do. But ultimately what happens is they take that cartridge and it's got some artificial flavoring. It smells like strawberry or banana or cherry or whatever that flavor is, or maybe it's not scented at all. And as you inhale the vapor off of this electronic cigarette, it enters the lungs, and same process of nicotine entering the system. It's just another nicotine delivery system. We still don't know yet what the inherent risks are with electronic cigarette use, but I think my biggest concern with electronic cigarettes is that people think that they're safe, right? And so when we look back on the tobacco ad campaigns, we've seen historically that with, for example, tobacco, people have thought, okay, so Camels are the most widely used cigarette by doctors, or with marijuana advertising. Even we've seen ad campaigns that say, well, marijuana is not addictive, or legalize it, or comparing alcohol and marijuana. And the biggest challenge with these kinds of ad campaigns is that whoever is trying to sell these products to people, if they came out and said, this product is absolutely dangerous, we've confirmed all of the risks that people think that are associated with these products, we probably wouldn't use them as much. And so unless we can get people addicted to that product first, and then it's harder to stop it later. They want lifetime customers. We know that with e-cigarettes, so we're looking at I think somewhere around right around 10% of 8th grade students have used an e-cigarette. This is, again, a nationwide number. And so the concern there is that e-cigarette use is absolutely growing. When we look at the southeastern region, this is the FCD Student Attitude and Behavior Survey. The numbers that you see on the screen here, what we know about parents talking to their kids about use, is that the majority of parents in the Southeast region have talked to their kids, and that's great news. And the reason why that's great news is because kids care what you have to say. Kids care what you think. Kids want to know that you disapprove of unhealthy behavior. Students who learn about the risks of alcohol and other drug use from their parents, or who have parents who clearly tell them that use is unacceptable, are actually far less likely to use and get in trouble with substances. And so also, just a key on this piece here, talking about showing interest in their schoolwork. Resiliency, right? Resiliency is the bouncing back to form. Resiliency is knowing that people care about me, and that I have support, and that it's okay if I make mistakes or I'm not a perfect child, but also having boundaries in place with feeling valued as a person. And when I say boundaries, by the way, what I'm referring to is boundaries around use. Feeling valued as a person within a school setting. The majority of kids feel valued as a person at school. That's great, because that is actually a protective factor for use as well. The reason why that is a protective factor is because when students feel valued and cared for at school, it is positively related to a student's choice to abstain from alcohol and other drugs. Encouraging schools to enhance these positive relationships can have a protective effect on adolescent health. And so if your child is in a school community like this one, where the school cares about students, and the school has has an open environment where kids feel safe and feel connected and feel okay to come talk to their teacher or come talk to their counselor for any reason, that's absolutely a protective factor. Additionally, when we look at the southeastern states, we also notice when we talk about higher risk drinkers. And I want to talk about, before I go into some of these numbers, I want to talk about what a higher risk drinker is in the context of substance use. And so the way that questions are asked on surveys, typical surveys, is that higher risk use is 5 or more drinks in a row. Higher risk. And then we break it down to lower risk. We're going to talk about higher risk here. Lower risk is 1 to 4 drinks in a row on any given setting. Higher risk is 5 or more drinks on any given setting. Now, it doesn't mean that lower risk drinkers don't experience problems. I can be a lower risk drinker and still be high risk. For example, I remember the first couple of, probably the first year or so of my drinking, I only had to have 1 or 2 drinks before I got intoxicated. Now, over a period of time, my tolerance built, but 1 or 2 drinks was still high risk for me as an individual. So I don't want to negate that information. But I do want to cover here what we talk about with higher risk use, having 5 or more drinks in a row. And the numbers are a bit surprising. 78% got sick or had a hangover, vomited. That's the majority of kids that are drinking in high risk amounts. Again, the majority had a blackout. A number of students later felt sorry for something that they did. I'm sure that when we look at these numbers, we're thinking to ourselves, I don't want that to happen to my child, especially the one where it says we don't want our child to get into a sexual situation that they later regret. We know that we want our child to come home whole and in one piece and feeling good about themselves and feeling resilient and happy. And the introduction of substances before the brain is ready, especially if I'm using and I'm having some of these negative consequences, what we know is that it's also something that we probably want to prevent. And the last one here, where the screen is covered up, I want to point out 43% of higher risk drinkers drink alcohol or use other drugs at home with a parent's knowledge. So what we know is that family plays a role in the choices of students, that if my parents are allowing it, then we have a higher number of students who may do so at home. But what we also know is that those students will, when they leave the home, they drink in higher amounts and they drink more often. So if I'm a parent and I'm allowing my child to have a drink or 2 at dinner with us because it's a quote unquote protected environment, I can't stress enough that really the only thing safe when we talk about the only thing safe that night is that the child may not be leaving the home, that the child may be in a slightly controlled environment. But what that does is that sets the stage for misuse of a substance later on. And so what parents can do, there are so many things that parents can do to be a part of the comprehensive prevention plan. And of course, having a conversation with your student, with your child, excuse me, can be difficult and uncomfortable and maybe even a little bit awkward sometimes. But we really want for parents to lay the groundwork early. One piece of research suggested that dinner time conversations really support your child, because let's say that you one of my colleagues uses this example where he says, if you make your child's favorite meal, you went through this effort or you got their favorite takeout, and you sit them down at the dinner table and you have this conversation around substances, that your child will still feel supported because you went through the effort to have a conversation with them, to show them that you love them, to show them that you care, and also to set a boundary. And believe it or not, kids need boundaries. Kids need to know where you stand on substance use choices, because if they don't know where you stand, for example, in my own household growing up, I knew that using substances was not acceptable. My mom being a drug and alcohol counselor, and my dad actually did drunk driving prevention. And between the two of them, I had to have known. And we had I remember we had conversations when I was younger, but then as I got a little bit older, I don't remember having those conversations. I don't remember my parents sitting me down and having 61-minute conversations over the course of my high school or even into my college years. I just don't remember those conversations. And when you sit down with your child, it's important that they know what those boundaries are, because if it's just expected and you're not actually reminding them or reinforcing them, it's something that goes in one ear, and then maybe they'll remember it when they're out with their friends, or maybe they won't. But if you continually remind them not to use substances or to make healthy choices or whatever that is for your family, whatever that conversation looks like, again, not telling parents what to do, but giving just some general guidelines. Also, helping your child with language. So for example, it's okay if your child needs to use you as their way out of a situation. Oftentimes when I ask in the classroom, what could you say, or what could somebody say in a scenario where somebody wants them to make a high risk choice, somebody wants them to drink, or somebody wants them to smoke, and I hear things from kids and they say, well, is it okay if I say, well, I've got to go, or there was an emergency, or my parents will kill me? And I said, sometimes, even like when we fumble through the things that we need to say, and I tell them that sometimes, even though it feels like it's a difficult thing to say or to stand up for yourself, it doesn't matter how ungraceful you are. If you got through it, and at the end of the day you got through that experience, and you were still healthy and you remained whole, I think you've done your job. And with as parents, helping them with language, saying things, give them things like, my dad will kill me, or hey, no, my mom will be waiting up, or something as simple as, well, I'm just not comfortable with this, can you please respect my decision? Practicing skills with assertiveness. Supporting your child with those conversations, setting the right stage in a neutral, unhurried environment. That's why being home, supporting them with food. You may not want to have that conversation right before a big game, or right before a test, or right after their boyfriend or their girlfriend has broken up with them, or we want to leave that conversation with love. Let them know that you care about them and you only care about their well-being. Using a caring tone, and even showing them a desire to understand what they're going through in the world that they're living in. Sometimes teenagers forget that adults used to be teenagers too, and so showing them that desire to understand, hey, what are you going through, or what's going on with you, right? I'm just curious, just checking in, having respect for their privacy at the same time. I think that there's a balance between the two. And also, you might notice that their reactions are not exactly what you had hoped for, and that's okay too. They might respond with suspicion. They might want to know, well, why are you asking? Maybe for the fear of a lecture, or maybe they're just confused themselves. Maybe your child has doubts that you'll understand them. You could start the conversation with a question. You could say, well, how do you want to respond if you're offered alcohol or other drugs? What would you say? And allow them to answer that question. And in a sense, you're not doing an official, we're going to role play this out, but in a sense, you're just simply saying, how do you want to respond to this? Or how can I support you in making healthy choices? What do you need from me? And in that sense, you're not doing an official role play but just asking that question. How do you want to respond if you're offered a substance? You're giving them a chance to think about that. So if they're ever in that situation, they remember that conversation that they had with you, and that can be a reminder for them in that moment. We also know that kids, and I think I said before, kids want boundaries. We know that children want boundaries, but they also, if a child perceives that their parent disapproves of use, then that child is actually less likely to use a substance. Again, it is a protective factor. And so again, reminding you to have conversations about what your family values are, letting your kids know where you stand. Those boundaries are very important. Oftentimes parents will ask the question, what do I do about my own, what do I say about my own history with alcohol or other drugs if they ask, which, hey, they might ask, right? Especially if your child comes home and says, do we have a family history of alcoholism, right? That's a question that we absolutely advise parents to be open and honest with their kids about. We also advise parents to be honest about your own history, but again, bookmarking it or bookending it with a negative consequence. Again, too, it's your choice as far as what you say, how much you say. Kids don't need to know everything. Of course, those would be age appropriate answers. So you could choose to say, no, that wasn't a part of my experience, or you could choose to be open with them, but bookending it with a negative experience. Also, you would want to make sure that your spouse is on the same page with you, because you don't want you don't want your child going to one parent and asking a question about use in terms of your own history, and then going to the other parent and getting a different answer. You want to make sure that you and your spouse have also had a conversation before you have that conversation with your own child. If your child comes to you, of course, they also tend to ask questions at inopportune moments. And if they ask a question that you're not uncomfortable with answering, say, hey, can we talk about this a little bit later? I want to give some more thought to this, or I don't necessarily have all the answers to that right now. Let me get back to you. That's absolutely appropriate. And also, when and under what circumstances is teen alcohol use advisable? When we look at teen alcohol use, really what model FCD uses is the delayed use model. And the delayed use approach ultimately is waiting until the brain is fully developed. A teenager is 4 times more likely to develop addiction at age 15 rather than if they waited until the age of 21. That risk goes way down to 10%. And so 4 in 10 teenagers, if they start drinking at the age of 15, will get addicted. 1 in 10 teenagers, if they start drinking, but 1 in 10 young adults will get addicted if they start drinking at age 21. And so when and under what circumstances is teen alcohol use advisable? We say delayed use, but we also respect different cultures, and we respect the different boundaries of different families. It doesn't really make that much of a difference if a child is growing up in Augusta, Georgia, or if a child is growing up in Paris, France. The bottom line is that a teen brain is still developing no matter where they're growing up. In fact, in countries where the drinking age is lower, I fully understand that the United States is one of the few countries with the high drinking age set at 21. But what we know is not only has the 21 minimum drinking age law saved about 1,000 lives per year based on the reduction of drunk driving deaths, we also know that in countries where the drinking ages are lower, compared to students in schools, compared to those students in other schools, students in schools where the drinking age is less than 21, they're more likely to report consuming 5 or more drinks in a row in the past 30 days. So they're more likely to be a higher risk drinker. They're more likely to get drunk in the past 30 days. They were more likely to agree with the statement, it is cool to get drunk. And they were more likely to experience an alcohol-related injury. And so what we know is that when the drinking age is lower, all that's ultimately happening is a child is increasing their tolerance level. And tolerance is actually one of the big indicators that is a sign of addiction. High tolerance also is a major risk factor for developing addiction. And that happens over a period of time. And so if we were to quote unquote teach a child how to drink, really what we're doing is and teaching a child how to quote unquote handle their alcohol. Most adults should only have 1, 2, maybe 3 drinks on any given day, spaced an hour apart, and that's based on a health guideline. If we give a child whose body isn't, say you give a 100-pound, 120-pound child, that 1 drink limit actually decreases based on size. And so if you give a child that same amount of alcohol that you might give an adult, their liver still has to work to break that down. And it still increases the risk that they'll develop problems. It still increases the risk that they will develop addiction. And again, when we look at some of those when we go back to that slide, let me go back here. When we look at the consequences of use, wow, that's really, when we look at that 43% of students who are drinking at home with their parents' knowledge, we know that we probably want our kids to be making healthy choices and we want the best outcomes. And what this data ultimately tells us is that if my child is drinking at home, they're likely to drink in higher quantities and experience more problems. We also know that some of the warning signs of use, just to touch on that for you, warning signs are interesting because they often appear to be the same warnings, not even warning signs, but change in behavior, change in peer group, attitude one day, no attitude the next. Warning signs, those are typical teenage things. But if you notice that the change in peer group is with a group of peers that are making some unhealthy choices, or your gut feeling is telling you something's not right, something's probably not right. If your child is carrying Visine around with them, because marijuana tends to make the blood vessels in the eye turn red. You see Visine in your child's backpack, they don't otherwise have any issues with allergies, there might be a sign there. If you find paraphernalia, like if you find an e-cigarette, or if you find a cigarette pack, or you find the cellophane of a cigarette pack or something in your car, and your child says, no, that was my friend's, it probably wasn't their friends. I mean, it could happen. Let's give them, you could give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. But it's a lot easier for me to pass it, if I'm a student or a child, to pass that off to say, oh, that was my friend that was doing it. Oh, you know that my friend smokes, or you know that my friend drinks. Well, there's another risk there, that your child is spending a large enough amount of time with that friend who's been making some unhealthy choices. And within surroundings, a peer group could also influence your own child's choice to use a substance. If I think that my child may be using drugs, it's always advisable to seek professional help with that. There are a number of resources that are within the Augusta community, but even if you drove the hour and a half into Atlanta, there are a number of resources within the Atlanta area to at least go and get an evaluation done by a drug and alcohol counselor. But not being afraid to seek help, not being afraid to seek support, because shame and secrets build on shame and secrets. And within families, addiction is not just an individual disease. It's not just the disease that I carry. It's the disease that the entire family carries. And so everybody in that family potentially could need some support, some counseling to help the individual, maybe your child or somebody else within your family, to help support them through that process. But it's a lot easier, again, to prevent the process of addiction than it is to treat it. And so that's why so many resources are being poured into the prevention field. Speaking of resources, what we can look at here, you can always look us up at fcd.org. We get quite a bit of our research and data from NIDA, as well as from Above the Influence. And so we will open this up here. If there are any questions, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A. Okay. So one question that has just come through is, are kids prepared for college if they have no experience with alcohol before they go? Actually, research shows that, again, the younger a child uses a substance, the more likely they are to have a problem with it. When kids are going off to college, think about it like the biggest transition period in a person's life. And this transition period where there's so many other changes going on. Let's think about what's happening when they're going off to college. They're picking out dorms, they're finding roommates, they're learning how to cook. Some of them are learning how to do laundry for the first time. Some of them are going across the country. Some of them are going into different countries to go to school. Some of them are going just down the street from your house. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of changes going on. And when I worked with the seniors today and I asked, What are you most looking forward to? Oh, I'm looking forward to the freedom. I'm looking forward to being able to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. I'm looking forward to setting my own schedule. Well, those are really great things to look forward to. And we're really excited that they're at this new and exciting moment in their lives, but we're also concerned about substance use. And if students haven't used the substance before they went to college, that's actually puts them in a position to succeed more than the child who started drinking when they were in high school or before they went to college. And the reason for that is because if a child is using a substance or they're having experiences with alcohol or they're using marijuana and they're doing that for fun, and it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. And right now, and I said seem is the key word. And right now, they're doing well in school. We also know that academics, because in the schools that we work in, academics are so important to kids that they will not let their academics slip, not in high school. That's actually what our research says. But when students go off to college, what we tend to know is it tends to be a place where if I've been making high risk choices, that transition period, I have an opportunity to not go to class because somebody didn't make me go to class because nobody picked up the phone. I might be more likely to sleep in the next day. Because that transition period is so important to them. If a child doesn't have alcohol experience with alcohol before they go to college, that's awesome, because not only is it healthy for them as the individual, because remembering that there is always support for non-use choices, either at home while they're still here under your roof, or when they go to school and they join an alcohol-free dorm, or they find other kids that are making healthy choices, and they absolutely do exist. On a Friday night, if you go to the library, there might actually be students there. So really what we know is that when kids use substances before they go to school, again, that piece, if they use in the home or they are, it seems like they're better prepared because they know how it's going to affect them. They're not necessarily better prepared when they go off to school. A healthy way for a young adult to have their first drink of alcohol would be, and we're saying somebody whose brain is fully developed, or 20, 21, 22, whatever that age is, again, respecting those different cultural differences, would be to sit down, have a meal, have a glass of beer, and then stop there, not get intoxicated. But we're not talking about a 15 or a 16-year-old whose brain is still developing, whose brain is more likely to succumb to using a substance for that reward, to feel good, to have fun, whose brain is more likely to develop addiction. And so at the end of the day, kids aren't going to be more prepared to handle the situation at college. Sometimes we hear about, okay, so what if my child goes to a party and they drink, they get intoxicated, they're in an unsafe place, and they don't know how it was going to affect them? Well, again, a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old student, if they choose to do that, does that mean that they need to get drunk the first time that they drink if they choose to drink for the first time? No, it means that if they choose to have their first drink, that they may do it at dinner. They need to have food in their stomachs. They need to be hydrated. They need to take care of their bodies. And the purpose of it is not to get intoxicated. And so it doesn't help a student when they go off to school to learn how to drink at home, because research again says that they drink in higher quantities more often and actually have increased DUI rates. One of the challenges with DUI, I worked for Mothers Against Drunk Driving for 4 years, and one of the things that I learned from working with that organization was there was so much focus on drunk driving, right? So just don't drink and drive and everything's okay. And I was always so frustrated with that message, just get a designated driver, because we're missing a bigger picture here. That, okay, let's say that I get a designated driver this time or next time and the next time, and I drink to intoxication, I drink till I'm feeling good, I drink until I get that buzz going, and it's that one time that I've got my keys in my hand, I've only got a couple of miles to go home, and I get in the car and I drive home and nothing happens. I don't get pulled over, and I may not have been as drunk as I've been before, so I think that I'm okay. My decision making skills are impaired, And so I'm more likely to end up in a situation like drunk driving. I'm more likely to end up in a situation where I'm at a greater risk for having an assault or to be mugged. I am more in putting myself in a situation that anytime I get intoxicated, I put myself at risk. And so the goal is, if a child is going to drink out, if a young adult, 18, 19, 20-year-old, chooses to have their first drink of alcohol, remembering that the goal is to not get intoxicated. And if somebody builds a tolerance, right, there's a difference between having a drink and not getting intoxicated like most adults can do, and having 3 or 4 drinks because I have a high tolerance and feeling okay at the end of the night. So that's a little bit different, because the tolerance piece is also not only a risk factor for addiction, but if I feel okay, it puts me at a greater risk for doing other things that are dangerous. And if I may ask if we have any other questions out there. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting. And I'm going to pass it back over to Ms. Hudson.
Thank you all for attending. I hope that you enjoyed the topic. I always learn something, so there's a lot out there to be learned. And again, we appreciate you giving this a shot. Let us know how you liked it. And if you have questions that come up in the hours after you've thought this through, feel free to email them to me. And I will make sure to check with Stephanie. Y'all have a good evening.